I was standing in my parents' living room, holding a piece of paper that would change everything, when my mother looked me dead in the eye and said the words that shattered my world. "Nancy, we've decided to give your inheritance to your brother and sister instead. They need it more than you do." 22 years of being the responsible daughter, the one who stayed close to home, who helped them through every crisis, and this was my reward. But what they didn't know was that I had been preparing for this moment longer than they could imagine, and my revenge was going to be sweeter than anything they could have anticipated. Let me take you back to where this all began, because the seeds of this betrayal were planted long before that devastating afternoon. My name is Nancy Chen, and I grew up in a modest 2-story house in suburban Cleveland, Ohio. From the outside, we looked like any other middle-class American family. My father worked as an accountant at a local firm, my mother was a part-time librarian, and we had 2 cars in the driveway and a small but well-maintained garden in the backyard. But inside our house, there was an invisible hierarchy that governed everything. At the top were my siblings, Marcus, who was 2 years older than me, and Jessica, who was 3 years younger. I was the middle child, and from as early as I can remember, I was also the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never caused any trouble. When I was 8 years old, Marcus broke my mother's favorite vase while playing soccer in the house. Instead of owning up to it, he blamed me. I remember standing in the kitchen, tears streaming down my face, trying to explain that I had been in my room doing homework. But Marcus had already spun his story, claiming he saw me running through the living room with my backpack. My parents didn't even question it. I was grounded for a week and had to use my allowance money to help replace the vase. That same year, Jessica started having nightmares and would crawl into my bed in the middle of the night. Instead of going to our parents, she came to me because I never complained, never sent her away. I would hold her until she fell back asleep, even though it meant I was exhausted at school the next day. When my parents found out weeks later, they praised Jessica for being brave about her fears, but never acknowledged that I had been the one comforting her night after night. This pattern continued throughout our childhood. When Marcus got arrested at 16 for underage drinking, I was the one who had to pick him up from the police station because my parents were at Jessica's dance recital. When Jessica failed her driver's test 3 times, I was the one who spent hours practicing with her in empty parking lots, even though it meant I had to skip my own part-time job. I started working when I turned 14, first babysitting for neighbors, then getting a job at the local grocery store as soon as I turned 16. I wasn't working because we needed the money desperately, but because I wanted to save up for college. My parents had made it clear that while they would help with tuition, they couldn't pay for everything. Marcus, on the other hand, never worked a single job during high school. When his friends got summer jobs, my parents told him to focus on his studies and enjoy being young. During my senior year of high school, I applied for 17 different scholarships. I wrote essays, gathered recommendation letters, and submitted application after application. I ended up receiving a partial scholarship to Ohio State University, which would cover about 60% of my tuition. I was thrilled and immediately started planning how I would cover the remaining costs through part-time work and student loans. That same week, Marcus came home and announced that he wanted to go to a private liberal arts college in Vermont that cost nearly twice as much as my state school. My parents didn't even hesitate. They told him they would figure out a way to make it work. When I pointed out the financial discrepancy, my mother patted my shoulder and said, "Nancy, you've always been so good with money. You'll figure it out. Besides, Marcus really needs this opportunity to find himself." College was a turning point for me, but not in the way you might expect. Away from my family's dynamics, I thrived. I majored in business with a minor in psychology, maintained a 3.8 GPA while working 20 hours a week at the campus bookstore, and graduated summa cum laude. I had internships every summer, networked constantly, and by my senior year, I had 3 job offers waiting for me. Meanwhile, Marcus was struggling. He changed majors 4 times, took 6 years to graduate, and my parents paid for every extra semester without complaint. Jessica, who had started college 2 years after me, was following a similar path. She was more interested in sorority parties than studying, and her grades reflected that priority. After graduation, I moved to Chicago and started working for a mid-sized consulting firm. I lived in a tiny studio apartment, drove a used Honda Civic, and saved every penny I could. I wasn't being cheap or miserly, I was being strategic. I had learned early that in my family, financial security was something I would have to create for myself. Within 3 years, I had been promoted twice and was making good money. I bought a small condo in an up-and-coming neighborhood, not because I needed the space, but because I recognized it as a smart investment. I continued to live modestly, cooking at home, shopping sales, and putting 30% of my income into savings and investments. During this time, I stayed in close contact with my family. I called my parents every week, sent birthday and holiday gifts, and visited home at least once every 2 months. I watched as Marcus bounced from job to job, unable to find his passion or stick with anything long enough to build a career. My parents supported him through every transition, paying for his rent when he quit jobs impulsively and covering his car payments when he decided to pursue unpaid internships in creative fields. Jessica followed a different but equally expensive path. She graduated with a degree in communications and immediately decided she wanted to be an influencer. My parents supported this dream by paying for professional photography equipment, helping her rent cute apartments for content creation, and even funding several elaborate trips so she could create travel content. I want to be clear about something. I didn't resent my siblings for following their dreams or struggling to find their paths. What bothered me was the disparity in support and the complete lack of acknowledgement for the responsible choices I had made. When I bought my condo, my parents' reaction was, "That's nice, dear. Nancy's always been practical." When Marcus decided to quit his marketing job to try becoming a freelance photographer, the family group text was filled with encouraging messages about following your passion and how proud they were of his courage. By the time I turned 28, I had built a solid financial foundation. My condo had appreciated significantly, my investment portfolio was growing steadily, and I had been promoted to senior consultant at my firm. I was in a serious relationship with David, a software engineer who shared my values around financial responsibility and long-term planning. It was around this time that my parents started talking more seriously about their estate planning. They were both in their early 60s, healthy and nowhere near retirement, but my father's job required him to update his will and beneficiary information regularly. During one of our weekly phone calls, my mother mentioned offhandedly that they were reviewing their wills. "Just making sure everything is fair and square," she said. "We want to make sure all 3 of you kids are taken care of equally." I didn't think much of it at the time. In my mind, equally meant that their assets would be divided 3 ways when the time came, probably decades in the future. It seemed logical and fair. But over the next few months, I started noticing comments that should have been red flags. During a family dinner, Marcus joked about being broke again after a freelance client didn't pay him. My father immediately said, "Don't worry, son. We'll always make sure you land on your feet." When Jessica complained about her student loan payments, my mother sighed and said, "I just wish we could do more to help you kids get started in life." I was sitting right there during both conversations, but neither comment was directed at me. I had never asked for financial help as an adult, had never moved back home, and had never given them a reason to worry about my financial stability. But instead of seeing this as success, they seemed to view it as evidence that I didn't need their support. The first real warning sign came during Thanksgiving of my 29th year. We were all gathered around the dinner table when Jessica started complaining about her credit card debt. She had been living beyond her means, funding her lifestyle with credit while waiting for her influencer career to take off. She owed nearly $15,000 across multiple cards and was only making minimum payments. "I just don't understand how Nancy makes it look so easy," Jessica said, gesturing at me with her fork. "Like, how do you afford your mortgage and still have money for vacations and stuff?" Before I could answer, my father jumped in. "Nancy's always been different. She was born practical. Some people just have that gene." "It's not a gene," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "It's called budgeting and living below your means." Marcus laughed. Classic Nancy, making the rest of us feel bad about being normal people who actually enjoy life. I felt a familiar sting, the same one I'd felt countless times during our childhood when my responsibility was dismissed as just being different rather than making difficult choices. "I enjoy life plenty," I said. I just planned for it. My mother reached over and patted Jessica's hand. Don't worry, sweetheart. Your father and I have been talking, and we want to help you get back on track. Consider those credit cards paid off as an early Christmas present. The table went quiet, $15,000, just like that. I took a sip of wine and tried to process what I just heard. Not only were they paying off Jessica's irresponsible debt, but they were framing it as a gift, as if her poor financial choices were something to be rewarded. What about me? Marcus asked. I could use some help with my student loans. My father nodded. Of course, we'll take care of those two. It's not fair for you kids to start your adult lives buried in debt. I set down my wine glass carefully. What about my student loans? I asked. I still have about $8,000 left. The look my parents exchanged was brief but unmistakable. Nancy, honey, my mother said gently, you're doing so well already. You don't need help the way Marcus and Jessica do. And there it was. Because I had been responsible, because I had worked and saved and made careful choices, I was being penalized. My siblings' poor decisions were being rewarded with bailouts, while my good decisions meant I deserved nothing. I excused myself early that evening, claiming I had an early flight back to Chicago. But really, I needed time to think. I drove around my childhood neighborhood for an hour, processing what had happened. This wasn't just about money, though the financial disparity was certainly painful. This was about years of being overlooked, taken for granted, and expected to be fine with less because I was capable of taking care of myself. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to start paying very close attention to my family's finances and planning. If they were going to exclude me from their generosity because of my responsibility, I needed to understand exactly what that meant for my future. I started casually asking questions during our phone calls. How were their retirement savings looking? Had they considered long-term care insurance? Were they planning to downsize their house at some point? I framed these as a caring daughter's natural concerns, which they were, but I was also gathering intelligence. Over the course of several months, I learned that my parents had been far more financially generous with my siblings than I had realized. Beyond the recent debt payoffs, they had been regularly supplementing both Marcus and Jessica's incomes for years. They had paid for Marcus's photography equipment, his workshop fees, and had even co-signed on an expensive apartment lease when his income couldn't qualify him. They had been funding Jessica's content creation, paying for her gym membership, her phone plan, and regularly transferring money to help with her rent. I calculated that over the past 5 years alone, they had given my siblings approximately $60,000 in direct financial support. Meanwhile, the last time they had given me money was a $50 birthday check when I turned 25. But the real revelation came when my mother mentioned that they were planning to update their will again. We want to make sure it reflects our current wishes, she said during one of our calls. We've been thinking a lot about how to best help you kids. I decided to be direct. What does that mean exactly? Well, my mother said, and I could hear the careful tone she used when she was about to say something she knew might be controversial. Your father and I have been discussing the fact that you're so financially secure already. We're so proud of what you've built for yourself, Nancy. You really don't need our help the way Marcus and Jessica do. My stomach dropped, but I kept my voice steady. Are you saying you're planning to leave me less in the will? We're planning to leave you what you need, she said. And frankly, sweetheart, you need less. Marcus and Jessica are going to struggle more without our support. You've proven you can thrive on your own. I ended that phone call as quickly as I could and sat in my kitchen staring at the wall for 30 minutes. They weren't just excluding me from current financial help. They were planning to exclude me from their estate because I had made responsible choices. I was being punished for succeeding. That evening, I called my college roommate Sarah, who had gone to law school and now worked in estate planning. I told her the situation, and after she finished expressing her outrage on my behalf, she gave me some professional insight. Legally, they can leave their money to whoever they want, she said. But Nancy, what they're doing isn't actually helping your siblings. They're enabling dependency and poor decision-making. And they're penalizing you for being responsible, which is going to create long-term resentment and family dysfunction. She paused, but here's the thing. If they're planning to essentially disinherit you, they probably should tell you directly rather than letting you find out after they're gone. That's just going to make everything worse. Sarah was right, but I already knew my parents weren't going to have that direct conversation. They were going to continue framing their decision as what was best for everyone and fair based on need. And they were going to expect me to be understanding about it because I was always the understanding one. I spent the next few weeks thinking about my options. I could confront them directly, but I knew how that conversation would go. They would defend their decision by pointing out how well I was doing compared to my siblings, and they would make me feel guilty for caring about money when I clearly didn't need it. They would turn my concern into evidence of selfishness, and I would end up apologizing for bringing it up. I could accept the situation and focus on building my own wealth, knowing that I couldn't count on any inheritance. This was probably the mature, practical choice, and it was certainly what my parents expected from me. But it also meant accepting years of being treated as less deserving of support because I was responsible. Or I could do something else entirely. The idea came to me gradually. My parents were making their estate decisions based on their current perception of their children's financial situations and needs. They saw Marcus and Jessica as struggling and in need of support. They saw me as stable and self-sufficient, but what if those perceptions were based on incomplete information? I started doing research. I learned everything I could about estate planning, inheritance law, and family financial dynamics. I read books, consulted with professionals, and educated myself about strategies and options I had never considered before. I also started paying very close attention to my parents' comments about money and their plans. During every visit and phone call, I listened for clues about their thinking and their timeline. I learned that they were planning to finalize their updated will within the next year, probably around my father's 65th birthday. And then I started planning. My plan had 3 phases, and it was going to take at least 8 months to execute properly. Phase 1 was about gathering information and documentation. Phase 2 was about positioning and preparation. Phase 3 was the confrontation and resolution, but before I could begin, I needed to make sure I understood exactly what I was dealing with. I decided to have one more direct conversation with my parents about their estate plans. I drove home for a weekend visit about 4 months after our last discussion about the will. On Saturday evening, after Marcus and Jessica had left from a family dinner, I brought up the topic again. "I've been thinking about our conversation a few months ago," I said. "About the will and your estate planning. I want to make sure I understand your thinking." My parents exchanged a look. "What specifically do you want to understand?" my father asked. "You said you were planning to leave me what I need, and that I need less than Marcus and Jessica. I'm wondering if you could be more specific about what that means." My mother sighed. "Nancy, this is uncomfortable to talk about, but since you're asking directly, your father and I have decided to leave the majority of our estate to your brother and sister. You'll receive something, of course, but a smaller portion." "How much smaller?" Another look between them. "We were thinking about 20% to you and 40% each to Marcus and Jessica." 20%. I did the quick math in my head. Based on what I knew about their assets, that meant my siblings would each receive roughly 4 times what I would inherit. 4 times more because I had made responsible choices and they hadn't. "I see," I said quietly, "and this is because you think they need it more." "Exactly," my father said, looking relieved that I seemed to be taking it well. "You've got your career, your condo, your savings. You're set up for life. Marcus and Jessica are still finding their footing." "Marcus is 31, I pointed out. "Jessica is 26. At what point do you expect them to find their footing?" My mother frowned. "Nancy, that's not fair. Everyone's journey is different. Not everyone can be like you." "You're right," I said, standing up from the kitchen table. "Not everyone can be like me, but that doesn't mean I should be penalized for the choices I've made." I left that night feeling a combination of sadness and determination. The sadness was for the family dynamics I had hoped might change as we all got older. The determination was for what I was going to do about it. Phase 1 of my plan began the next week. I hired Sarah, my lawyer friend, to help me understand my parents' estate in detail. This wasn't about contesting the will or fighting their decision legally. It was about understanding exactly what assets we were talking about and how they were structured. What I discovered was fascinating. My parents had been more financially successful than I had realized. Beyond their house, which was worth about $400,000 and was almost paid off, they had retirement accounts worth nearly $600,000, a life insurance policy worth $200,000, and various other investments and savings totaling another $150,000. Their total estate was worth approximately $1.3 million. At the distribution they were planning, Marcus and Jessica would each receive about $500,000, and I would receive about $260,000. The difference was significant enough to change someone's life trajectory. But here's what was most interesting. A large portion of their wealth had been built through investments and financial decisions that I had actually influenced. Over the years, whenever my parents had asked for advice about their retirement planning or investment choices, I had researched options and made recommendations. My father's 401k portfolio had been restructured based on my suggestions 3 years earlier. They had refinanced their mortgage at a lower rate because I had walked them through the process and helped them compare offers. I had been an unpaid financial advisor to my parents for nearly a decade, helping them build the wealth that they were now planning to give predominantly to my siblings because I was financially secure. Phase 2 was where things got interesting. I realized that my parents' decision was based on their perception of our current financial situations, but they didn't have complete information about any of us. They saw Jessica's social media posts about her lifestyle and assumed she was struggling financially. They heard Marcus's complaints about irregular income and assumed he needed ongoing support. And they looked at my stable job and modest lifestyle and assumed I was completely financially secure. But what if their assumptions were wrong? I started making subtle changes to how I presented my life to my family. Nothing dishonest, nothing unethical, but I stopped downplaying financial concerns that I actually had. When Jessica complained about her rent being expensive, I mentioned that my mortgage payment had increased due to rising property taxes. When Marcus talked about his irregular income being stressful, I shared that my company was going through restructuring and everyone was worried about job security. These weren't lies. My property taxes had increased and my company was restructuring. But previously, I would have mentioned these things as minor inconveniences rather than legitimate financial stresses. Now, I let my parents hear that my life wasn't as financially carefree as they had assumed. I also started asking my parents for small favors that I had never asked for before. Not money, but things like advice on home repair projects, help with my car when I was visiting, or borrowing tools for weekend projects. These were normal things that adult children ask their parents for, but I had always been so independent that I never asked for anything. Now I was showing them that I valued their support and guidance. The shift in their perception was gradual but noticeable. During phone calls, my mother started asking more questions about my job situation and my expenses. My father offered to help me research options when I mentioned needing to replace my aging Honda. They were starting to see me not just as the self-sufficient daughter, but as someone who might actually benefit from their support. Meanwhile, I was watching my siblings' situations very carefully. Jessica's influencer career was actually starting to show some promise. She had landed a few small sponsorship deals and was building a decent following. Marcus had finally found some stability working as a photographer for a local marketing agency. Neither of them was struggling as much as they had been a year earlier, but they weren't sharing this progress with our parents in the same way they had shared their struggles. This gave me an idea for Phase 3. I scheduled a family dinner at a nice restaurant for my father's 65th birthday. I told my parents I wanted to treat them to celebrate this milestone, and I invited Marcus and Jessica to join us. I chose the timing carefully. It was right around when I knew they were planning to finalize their updated will. The dinner started pleasantly enough. We ordered appetizers, caught up on everyone's recent activities, and I gave my father a thoughtful gift. A vintage camera I had found that matched one he had owned in college. He was genuinely touched, and the whole family was in good spirits. Then, during the main course, I started asking questions. Jessica, how's the influencer work going? Are you making decent money from it yet? Jessica lit up. Actually, yeah. I just signed a 6-month contract with a skincare brand, and I'm making more than I ever made at a regular job. Plus, I have 3 more companies interested in working with me. That's amazing, I said, genuinely happy for her. So you're financially stable now? Totally, she said. I mean, I still have to be careful about spending, but I'm not stressed about money anymore. It feels incredible. I turned to Marcus. And Marcus, how's the photography job working out? It's great, he said. Steady paycheck, good benefits, and I still get to do freelance work on the side. Honestly, I'm making more money now than I ever have. I even started contributing to a 401k. My parents were beaming with pride. Their children were all doing well, all successful in their own ways. It was exactly the moment I had been waiting for. I'm so happy for both of you, I said. It's wonderful that we're all in such good places in our lives. I paused and looked around the table. Actually, since we're all here and everyone's doing so well, I wanted to talk to you about something, Mom and Dad. The mood shifted slightly. My parents looked at me with curiosity, while Marcus and Jessica continued eating, not particularly interested in what they assumed would be another one of my practical topics. I've been thinking about our family and about fairness and support over the years, I began, and I realized there's something I need to address. I reached into my purse and pulled out a folder. Over the past few months, I've been doing some calculations, and I wanted to share what I found. My father looked confused. What kind of calculations? I opened the folder and pulled out the first document. I calculated how much financial support you've given each of us over the past 10 years. I placed a sheet of paper on the table. Marcus, you've received approximately $92,000 in direct financial support since college. This includes tuition help, rent assistance, car payments, equipment purchases, and debt payoffs. Marcus stopped eating. What are you doing, Nancy? I placed a second sheet on the table. Jessica, you've received approximately $78,000 in direct support. Tuition help, credit card payoffs, rent money, equipment and travel funding, plus ongoing monthly assistance with various expenses. Jessica looked confused and slightly defensive. Nancy, why are you? I placed a third sheet on the table. And I've received approximately $4,000 over the same period, mostly birthday and Christmas gifts. The table went quiet. My parents were staring at the papers, and I could see them trying to process the numbers. Nancy, my mother said slowly, what's your point? My point is that you've been financially supporting Marcus and Jessica based on the assumption that they needed help, and I didn't. But now they're both doing well financially, and they're both capable of supporting themselves. Yet you're still planning to give them the majority of your inheritance because of outdated assumptions about our situations. I pulled out another document. This is a copy of the conversation we had 6 months ago about your will. You told me you were planning to leave me 20% of your estate and give Marcus and Jessica 40% each because I don't need it as much. My father was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Nancy, this is a private family matter. It absolutely is, I agreed. And that's why I wanted to discuss it as a family. Because the decision you're making affects all of us, but it's based on information that's no longer accurate. I looked at Marcus and Jessica. Did you two know that Mom and Dad are planning to leave you each about $500,000 and give me about $260,000? Both of my siblings looked shocked. They clearly had no idea about the specifics of our parents' estate plans. But here's what's really interesting, I continued. Over the years, I've provided unpaid financial consulting to Mom and Dad. I've helped with investment decisions, refinancing, retirement planning, and budget optimization. I calculated that my advice has probably increased the value of their estate by at least $200,000. I pulled out one more document. So essentially, I helped build wealth that I'm now going to receive a smaller share of, despite having contributed to its creation and despite having received significantly less financial support over the years. The silence at the table was deafening. My parents looked stricken, Marcus and Jessica looked confused and uncomfortable, and I felt a combination of relief and terror at having finally said everything out loud. My mother was the first to speak. "Nancy, we had no idea you felt this way." "I tried to tell you how I felt," I said quietly. "But every time I brought up the disparity in treatment, I was told that I was different, that I was more capable, that I needed less. And maybe that was true when we were younger. But we're all adults now, and we're all capable of taking care of ourselves." "I tried to tell you how I felt," I said quietly. "But every time I brought up the disparity in treatment, I was told that I was different, that I was more capable, that I needed less. And maybe that was true when we were younger. But we're all adults now, and we're all capable of taking care of ourselves." Jessica spoke up. "Nancy, I never asked them to give me more than you." "I know you didn't," I said. "And I'm not angry at you or Marcus. You both took the support that was offered to you, which is completely natural. But I am disappointed that our parents made decisions about something this significant without having complete information about our actual situations." My father cleared his throat. "What are you proposing, Nancy?" This was the moment I had been preparing for. "I'm proposing that you reconsider your estate planning based on current reality rather than outdated assumptions. We're all adults, we're all capable, and we're all your children. If you want to leave us equal amounts, that seems fair. If you want to leave different amounts based on actual current need, then you should base that on accurate information." I paused. But what I'm not willing to accept anymore is being penalized for making responsible choices while my siblings are rewarded for making irresponsible ones. That dynamic has been harmful to our family relationships, and it's not something I'm going to quietly accept in your estate planning. Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Jesus, Nancy, you've really thought about this." "I've had to think about it," I said, "because no one else was thinking about fairness from my perspective." My mother looked like she was on the verge of tears. "We never meant to be unfair to you, sweetheart. We've always been so proud of how independent and capable you are." "I know you're proud of me," I said. "But being proud of someone and treating them fairly aren't the same thing. You can be proud of my independence while still acknowledging that I deserve equal consideration as your daughter." The conversation continued for another hour. There were tears, there were defensive moments, and there were long silences. But ultimately, we talked through the issues in a way we had never done before. Marcus and Jessica both admitted that they hadn't realized how differently I had been treated over the years, and they both said they would be uncomfortable inheriting significantly more than me. My parents admitted that they had made assumptions about what each of us needed without really examining whether those assumptions were still accurate. By the end of the evening, my parents had agreed to revise their estate planning to divide their assets equally among the three of us. More importantly, they committed to being more mindful about financial support and treating us equally as adults going forward. The immediate aftermath of that dinner was complicated. My parents went through a period of examining their behavior and feeling guilty about the disparities in how they had treated us. Marcus and Jessica had to adjust to receiving less ongoing financial support, which was initially difficult, but ultimately helped them become more confident in their financial independence. As for me, I felt a combination of relief, validation, and sadness. Relief that I had finally addressed the issue directly instead of letting resentment build. Validation that my feelings about the unfair treatment had been legitimate, but also sadness that it had taken such a dramatic confrontation to have honest communication about something so important. The months following that dinner brought significant changes to our family dynamics. My parents started asking for my input on financial decisions in a more formal way, and they began compensating me for the financial consulting I provided them. They also started treating all three of us more equally in terms of expectations and support. Marcus and Jessica both stepped up in ways I hadn't expected. Marcus took over more responsibility for helping with family logistics and planning, roles that I had always filled by default. Jessica started contributing more to family gatherings and holiday planning. They both began checking in on our parents more regularly and taking initiative on family matters. Our relationships as siblings improved significantly. Without the underlying tension of unequal treatment, we were able to build more authentic connections with each other. Marcus and I started having regular conversations about career goals and life planning. Jessica and I began collaborating on family gifts and celebrations in ways we never had before. But the most important change was in my relationship with my parents. They began seeing me not just as the responsible daughter who would always be fine no matter what, but as a full person with my own needs, concerns, and deserving of equal consideration. They started asking about my life not just to check that I was okay, but because they were genuinely interested in my experiences and challenges. 6 months after that birthday dinner, my parents called all three of us for a family meeting. They had finished updating their will, and they wanted to share the final details with us. The new will divided their assets equally among the three of us, with some additional provisions for charitable donations and specific bequests of personal items. But more than that, they had created what they called a family financial philosophy document. It outlined their approach to supporting their adult children, emphasizing equal treatment, transparent communication, and supporting independence rather than creating dependency. They had also established a small emergency fund that any of us could access in case of unexpected financial hardship, with clear guidelines for repayment and usage. "We want to thank Nancy for forcing us to have this conversation," my father said during that meeting. "It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. We realized we had fallen into patterns that weren't fair or healthy for any of you." My mother nodded. "We're still learning, but we want to do better. We want our family relationships to be based on equality and respect, not on assumptions about who needs what." That was 2 years ago. Today, our family relationships are stronger than they've ever been. My parents treat all three of us as capable adults who deserve equal consideration and support. Marcus has continued thriving in his photography career and has even started teaching workshops for other aspiring photographers. Jessica's influencer business has grown into a legitimate marketing consultancy, and she's building real financial security for herself. As for me, I got promoted to partner at my consulting firm last year, bought a larger condo in a great neighborhood, and got engaged to David. My parents were just as excited about my engagement as they would have been about Marcus or Jessica's, and they offered to contribute equally to our wedding expenses as they would for any of their children. The most important thing I learned from this experience is that sometimes being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who never causes problems, can actually be a problem itself. If you always take care of everything and never advocate for yourself, people start to assume you don't need advocacy. They start to take your competence for granted and forget that you're human too. I also learned that confronting unfairness doesn't have to be mean or vindictive to be effective. I didn't have to destroy my relationships with my family to address the problems in those relationships. But I did have to be willing to have uncomfortable conversations and to present facts clearly, even when those facts made people feel guilty or defensive. My revenge wasn't cruel or destructive. It was simply refusing to accept unfair treatment and insisting on equal consideration. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is to calmly present the truth and refuse to be dismissed or marginalized. The night before my wedding, my parents pulled me aside for a private conversation. My mother had tears in her eyes as she spoke. "Nancy, we want you to know how grateful we are that you stood up for yourself 2 years ago," she said. "We were making a terrible mistake, and we didn't even realize it. You saved our family from a lot of pain and resentment that would have lasted for years." My father nodded. "We're so proud of the woman you've become, and we're sorry it took us so long to see that being proud of you meant treating you fairly, not just assuming you'd be fine no matter what." As I stood there in my wedding dress, surrounded by my family who finally saw me as an equal rather than just the responsible daughter, I realized that my plan had worked better than I ever could have hoped. I hadn't just gotten my fair share of my parents' estate. I had got something much more valuable. I had gotten their respect, their genuine consideration, and a family dynamic based on equality rather than assumptions. My revenge was complete, but it had transformed into something much better than revenge. It had become the foundation for healthier, more honest relationships that would last for the rest of our lives. And sometimes, the sweetest victory is not destroying your enemies, but transforming them into true family.